Hello and welcome back. This is your Week 1 schedule breakdown. Obviously, there have been 2 games played already with the Devils dominating the Sabres overseas, but now that that's out of the way, how can you manipulate your roster to get the game volume that you need to win in Week 1? So in this video, I'll look at the best and worst team schedules this week, some waiver adds, and some goalie streams for the week. So without further ado, let's jump right in. With the Week 1 schedule, there's a number of light nights. The only heavy nights are Thursday and Saturday, 9 games and 14 games on Saturday. So those are the heavier nights where you're going to need to potentially work on your roster for the other nights. So Monday with 1 game, Tuesday with 3, Wednesday with 5, Friday with 4, and Sunday with 4. Those are your light nights. A couple of teams have some nice schedules. Before we get into that, there are 15 teams that play 3 games. There's 14 that play twice, and Washington is the worst schedule. Only 1 game, and it is a heavy night, so you're going to want to steer clear of Washington Adds. Now, with all of that said, there are 2 teams that play 3 light night games. You're looking at Vegas, who has the Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. Same thing with Winnipeg. Of the 2, I think Vegas has the slightly better schedule, just looking at St. Louis and Anaheim. Compare that with Chicago and Minnesota. Minnesota, I think, is a little bit tougher than St. Louis, but it's kind of, throw it up in the air, see what sticks, because either of these guys have really good matchups here against Anaheim and Chicago, and they have tough matchups here against Colorado and Edmonton. So a little bit of a mixed bag with those guys. We'll take a look at some waiver adds from these teams. If you want that max game volume, the way you can run that is by picking up some St. Louis Blues for the first half of the week and then finding some Oilers for the weekend. So the Blues, they're at Seattle, they're at San Jose, and then at Vegas. That's Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Then if you're, I would probably look to do this for categories league or for peripherals, mainly hits and blocks, shot volume, things like that. I wouldn't necessarily work on, 5-game week with this stack, just looking for offensive categories. But if you're looking for those peripherals, get a guy on St. Louis for these nights and then drop them on Saturday morning, pick up an Oiler for these games. And then obviously the Oilers playing Chicago on the second night of their back-to-back is going to be a huge point opportunity, but there's not a lot to look at in terms of Oilers waiver adds. So we'll start it off by looking at this in terms of waiver adds for these teams. And then after all of this, we'll take a look at some goaltending streaming options with some back-to-backs. But before we get into that, let's start with the best schedule this week, and that is the Vegas Golden Knights. So a couple of things to note here. William Karlsson was falling through a number of drafts that I did. He's still a really valuable player. 0.86 points per game, 0.43 goals per game. That's a mid-30 goal pace. 2.5 shots per game, getting some power play time. And they shipped out Chandler Stevenson, so he will be getting a little bit more of a role in the top 6. He does see some power play time. And at 35% ownership, he's probably your best bet off the waiver wire. Couple of hits, couple blocks, but nothing crazy there. You've got Barbashev, 16%, a little bit lower on the shot volume, a little bit lower on the point per game level, but you're getting hits out of him, and he's dual position eligible. So that's why he's 16% owned. He's mainly a hits specialist. He is getting top line minutes with Jack Eichel, so that's worth noting. And I believe he's getting a little bit of power play time. So we'll have to wait and see how that falls in terms of, maybe that was happening in preseason, but we'll see what the regular season brings. But dual position eligibility is nice from him. And then if you're looking for hits and blocks as opposed to just hits and dual position eligibility, there's a couple of options. So Braden McNabb is your best defensive ad at 12%, 1.82 hits per game, 2.52 blocks per game. Everybody on Vegas blocks, and their top 3D are owned up pretty well. And then you've got Keegan Kolesar if you're looking for the opposite. So McNabb a little bit more block heavy. Kolesar only 2% owned, single position right wing, 4th line minutes, but 3.51 hits per game. So that's what you're getting out of him. So these are specialty tools. Braden McNabb hits and blocks D, Kolesar just for hits. And you can see the schedule breakdown is pretty nice for these players. Now that draft season is over, head on over to the link in the description below and fill out this draft strategy data collection form. This is going to allow me to get some data on what league types people are playing in, what point weightings are out there, what categories people are using most, and it's also going to give us a sense of where you drafted your players and what worked. So fill this out now that you've finished your draft, and then come back at the end of the season, let me know where you finished, and we can use that to find the most effective strategies for each specific league type. So please click the link in the description below. Now up next, we've got the Winnipeg Jets. There are a couple of offensive guys you can get from this team We'll start it off with Gabe Vilardi, 42% owned. He might be there for you in a 12-team league, dual position, center, right wing eligible. And as I mentioned in some of the preseason work, the only thing that is the problem with Gabe Vilardi is he just doesn't stay healthy. He's played in about 55% of his team's games over the last 3 seasons, but when he's in, he's really good. .47, that's almost a 40-goal pace. He's got 2.5 shots per game, pretty much the same as William Karlsson, but better goal totals there. And then he does play on the power play, .30 power play points per game. He's line 1 and power play 1 with dual eligibility, so that's why his ownership is that high. He's definitely worth a stream if you have a 12-team league and he is available. 10-team league, maybe not, depending on what you're looking for, but that positional flexibility is nice. Neil Pionk, he's got a little bit lower shot volume, but you're getting him for the hits and blocks. So 2.7 hits, 1.44 blocks per game. That's what you like to see out of a hits and blocks D. He's 42% owned, so he may or may not be there for you. And there's a couple of other options that we can look at throughout this video to give you some replacement options for a guy like that who's going to get you the hits and blocks that you need. Now, a little bit further down in the ownership, maybe deeper league target, Nino Niederreiter, 2.21 shots per game is not great, but it's not bad for a 6% ownership guy. The hits volume is going to go along with that. 1.49 hits is nice to see, and he does score a couple goals here and there. Should be around a 25-goal pace throughout the season. A little bit low on the point totals, and his role has kind of diminished over the years, but he's dual eligible now, which is nice to see. So at 6%, a little bit of positional flexibility, some shot volume, and then a little bit of exposure to some of the elite level players that they're working with in Winnipeg. But if you want that exposure, you might as well go Cole Perfetti at 18% ownership, dual position center left wing. Shot volume is a little bit lower, but you're getting a little bit more power play time out of him. And then the goal totals still a little bit higher than Nino Niederreiter. Maybe I think I would lean Nino if you're looking for goals just because he's a veteran. They, are a little bit more reliable when it comes to goal scoring as opposed to younger guys, but Perfetti should be coming into his own right now. Higher point ceiling out of Perfetti, so that's going to be another factor to his file. But these are some of the options you can find on the waiver wire right now for Winnipeg. But if you're looking for that max game strategy, that's where we start to look at St. Louis. And there's a number of players to pick off of St. Louis. Nobody seemed to pay too much attention to these guys in fantasy drafts. You've got Braden Shen at 18% ownership, center left wing dual eligible, 2 hits per game, 2.06 hits, 2.07 shots, and a little bit over half a point per game is about as good as you're going to find at 18%. Dual eligibility is nice as well. So you're getting a hitter up front with a little bit of positional flexibility, and you're getting 3 of those games in the front part of the week, and then you can still drop him on Saturday and pick somebody else up for the weekend. Now, with that said, Jake Neighbors is arguably a better option. So Shen is on power play 2, Jake Neighbors power play 1, left wing, right wing, dual position eligibility, a little bit lower point ceiling, at least in terms of last year. Shot volume is a little bit lower. Power play numbers are a little bit higher, slightly higher. And then the hits are not bad at all. So 1.81 hits per game is nice to see from a guy that is, typically an offensive guy, and he's younger. So he's not necessarily proven that he's a peripherals guy over the last couple of years. So some hits volume, a little bit lower shot volume, and maybe better line exposure on that first power play unit and in the top 6. And then as we were talking about with Neil Pionk, here's Colton Parayko for your hits and blocks, 1.38 hits, 2.66 blocks. So a little bit of the inverse of Neil Pionk, who was a little bit more hits heavy. He does score some goals. He has done that in the past. He didn't necessarily do it last year, but he's been as high as 10 to 15 goals in the past. So that is another option there. He's not going to get as much power play time with Justin Falk running that power play, and the shot volume is a little low for my taste. But if you're just looking for hits and blocks, he is an option there. Now, the second half of that 5-game week play is the Edmonton Oilers. There's not a lot to look at in terms of guys who aren't owned up. So a lot of their guys have been picked up in the draft. So Arvidsson, in a shallow league, a 10-team league, you might be able to find Victor Arvidsson, 50%, single position left wing. That shot volume is real nice, 3.28 shots per game, 1 block per game, occasionally hits. He did get some power play time, 0.28 power play points per game. Is really nice to see out of him as well. 0.83 point per game number. So he's relatively productive with that good shot volume. He's always been a guy that I look to on the waiver wire. And if he is available, then that would be worth a stream. The only thing I don't like about it is he's a single position left wing now. I believe he used to be dual position, but Nonetheless, he should be your best option on the waiver wire. But if you can't find him, Adam Henrique is not great in terms of a replacement. The shot volume is maybe half of what Arvidsson does, but he does pick up some hits as well. And he played pretty well in his role as a third-line center. So if they can surround him with some better talent, which they should be able to now that they've brought in Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson, slotted some other guys further down the lineup, that could benefit Adam Henrique. And if you're in a league with some shorthanded points, I believe he gets those as well as he gets some penalty kill time. Now, one kind of afterthought that didn't really get talked about a lot is Ty Emberson. So they got rid of CeCe to shed some cap space to try to potentially sign those RFAs that they ultimately ended up letting walk. And in that deal that they made with the Sharks, they bring back Ty Emberson and 3.13 hits per game, 1.53 blocks per game. So a really productive hits and blocks D at only 2% ownership on a team that is much better than what he was on last year, where he had a humongous plus minus number. So this should benefit him. I'm not sure about the shot volume. Maybe that's just a product of, not getting a lot of offense in San Jose. Maybe that comes up a little bit. But even with that said, 3.13 hits per game is worth targeting him just for that, let alone the block number at 1.53. So a couple of options for you. If you're going to do this St. Louis Edmonton streaming 5-game week type of thing, I would look at guys like Emberson who are going to get you those peripherals that you can kind of just, continuously look at their floor and not really hope for production. Production is, kind of comes and goes, and this is sort of more of a volume play as opposed to looking at matchups and finding high producers in terms of points and goals. Now, up next, we're going to take a look at the goaltending, and there's a couple of different streaming options that we can look at. As we look at goaltending this week, there are a couple of different ways you can get a couple starters off the waiver wire, and you can also find some guys who have back-to-backs. So of the back-to-back teams, there are 9. You're looking at Toronto, St. Louis, Seattle, Chicago, Dallas, Edmonton, Tampa Bay, Anaheim, and Philadelphia. A couple of those guys you can see on the left. But then you also have a couple of starters that you can look at. I don't know if Sam Erson's actually a starter, but Peter Mrazek is, and he should be rostered higher than 11%. So as we look at some of these guys, we'll start it off with Anthony Stolarz, and this is a guy who's pretty much been an excellent backup wherever he's gone. Had this one drop-off year, but back up last year with the Florida Panthers, who ended up winning the Stanley Cup. .925 save percentage last year, 27 games, 2.03 goals against, and his goals saved above expected 98th percentile there. His team defense should, it kind of went down compared to what Florida was last year. Florida did lose a lot off their blue line, so the Toronto Maple Leafs should have an improved blue line based on what they've added in the offseason with Chris Tanev and OEL. So this should actually be a little bit higher if we're looking at this year's number, but this is obviously last year's. So Stolarz is probably your best bet, but he's 53% owned. So if you can't get him, you could take a look at one of the other better backups in the league, Casey DeSmith. He comes over to Dallas. They're a very good defensive team, 91st percentile last year, and not much has changed on their blue line. A little bit has. As they bring in Matt Dumba and lose, I believe, Hakanpää. But with that said, Casey DeSmith has been a reliable backup. Just didn't have the great numbers last year, .895, but a .289 goals against, 29 games, so a little bit more volume than Stolarz, but that's not going to matter this week. The team defense is the main reason to scoop him up, and if you're in a deep league, he's 2% owned, so that should be valuable as well. Now, of those two games, I would probably prefer him to play against the Islanders, but I doubt they'll do that. I think there would maybe go back to him in the second game of a back-to-back, but we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. But in terms of Seattle, you can find Philip Grubauer on the waiver wire. He's only 12% owned. I don't like him anymore. I did when he was close to this 92 rating. This was a couple seasons ago where he was top 10, and I believe he was playing for Colorado that season and then fell off a cliff ever since he's come over to Seattle. So not really great there, but what you are getting is excellent team defense, 94th percentile there. They should have an improved offense, just bringing in Chandler Stevenson, another year of Matty Beniers. This should be a little bit of a better offense than last year. 2 years ago, they were excellent. Last year, they fell off offensively, but they were still good defensively. And Grubauer at 12% ownership. Of the guys who are good starters on good defensive teams or starters on good defensive teams, he is one guy that could, in theory, push Decord back to a 1B or 1A and maybe steal some starts there. So that could be a longer-term idea. Of those two games, they're both kind of difficult. There's not really a preference there. Now, if you are looking for a starter, Peter Mrazek might be your best option. On a team that was horrendous defensively, 13th percentile defensively, he had a .907 save percentage last year, which is crazy. He took on a ton of save volume. So if you're in a points league that has 1 point per save or heavy save weighting, he was 95th percentile there, 1,500 plus saves last year. 56 games means he was a bona fide starter. Not a lot of wins, obviously, but they should be an improved team this year. They looked a little bit better in the training camp, and they're getting back Taylor Hall in addition to the other guys that they've brought in, Bertuzzi, Teravainen, etc. So this should be an improved defense with some of the guys that they've brought in, Alec Martinez going on their blue line, and on top of that, their offense should be better, and hopefully Connor Bedard stays healthy. So this could be a very low-risk option at 11% ownership. They do have a back-to-back, so Mrazek will probably get 2 games this week. Take your pick if he's going to play Winnipeg or Edmonton. It doesn't really matter. Both of those are good offensive teams. Utah is a pretty decent team also, so that should be a tough matchup, but at least you're getting 2 starts out of him. Now up next, we have Sam Ersson. He put on a pretty good show in the first 2/3 of last year and then fell off a cliff towards the end, and that's why his save percentage is down to .890. The goals against was okay until the end. 51 games, that means they trusted him for quite a while, especially with Carter Hart leaving. And then he wasn't necessarily that good in terms of skill, a little bit below expected. The team defense was pretty good there, 78th percentile. So that should be a nice thing to look at going forward this season. They didn't change a lot on their blue line. And that Torts defense is probably something that you're going to want exposure to. You have Ersson at 17%. You've got Fedotov at 15%. I don't have any data on him, but he is another guy that you could turn to as a 1A, 1B. Philly should be a pretty good team. You can look at their team defense. Their team scoring was pretty good. They just kind of fell off last year as they entered the playoff stretch, but they were very good up until that point, and they had a playoff spot locked down until about the last 3 weeks of the season. So this could be a very low-risk tandem option if you're looking for some goaltending on the wire. And that Saturday game against Calgary with the back-to-back, that's what I would be looking at in terms of a streaming option. Vancouver's a very good offense. I don't know how much you'd want to face them. Calgary, a little bit lower down in terms of offense, so that would be the better start there. Now, up next, we have Joel Hofer. He's a guy that has popped off at various points in the past. You can see his skill level, 84th percentile, goals saved above expected. The team defense wasn't very good last year. They are still missing Torrey Krug. He's out for the whole season. They've brought in Philip Broberg. They've tried to address some of that blue line, but really not enough in terms of offensive moves to really bolster that blue line. And Binnington actually kind of saved their skin last year and was very good. You look at Joel Hofer, 15 wins and 30 starts, so he is pretty much a 1B, not necessarily a backup. 2.65 goals against is pretty good, and a .913 save percentage is not bad for this team defense either. He's really low at 4% ownership, and if he gets that Thursday game at San Jose, that would be the optimal start for him and for your lineup. And then last but not least, we have Dostal, who is probably the number 1 right now with Gibson on the shelf. But with that said, they do have the back-to-back, and those are their only 2 games this week. Saturday at San Jose and then Sunday at Vegas. So if he starts that San Jose game, that would be the spot to start him. And you can see, really good save volume because Anaheim usually gives up 35 plus shots against per game. Decent number in terms of games. 44 games means that was almost an even split with him and Gibson, and he kind of stole some starts away. .902 save percentage is not bad considering they were one of the worst defensive teams last year. 3.44 expected goals against per game for that team. So this is not necessarily a team I'd like goaltending from, but against San Jose, that might be the best place to spot start an Anaheim Ducks goaltender. There are some other options, but that's going to do it for this video. If you have any tips, if you have any observations that you've made in preseason that might be helpful to the fantasy community, leave them in the comments section below. It's always nice to hear everybody's feedback. I try to watch as much highlights as I can each night, but it's different when you're rooting for your team and you're following them and analyzing them night to night. So if you have any tips, leave them in the comments section below. But thank you all for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.